Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today, I'm standing with our Chief of Procurement Officer, Charlotte Roberts, as well as our Corporate Counsel, Mary Richardson Laurie. In today's City Council meeting, we took steps to make Chicago more affordable, equitable, and safe. First, we are extending Chicago's Vehicle Violation Debt Relief Program. This program was set to expire on June 30th, but now drivers have another month to resolve eligible violations at reduced costs by paying only the base fine, with penalties and fees being fully waived, as long as a full payment is made by the end of the month. As of today, the program has saved motorists $9.5 million already. Next, we permanently established the veteran-owned small business participation goal to ensure that veteran-owned businesses are well represented in our city, and particularly as it relates to city contracts. Veterans served our city and nation fighting for our freedom and our way of life. We owe it to veterans to thank them for their service by ensuring that they can thrive when they return home to Chicago, and today's measure did just that. Next, City Council strengthened CDOT's Smart Streets pilot program, a step to enhance the efficiency of Chicago's bus network by protecting bus lanes. City Council also approved the landmark status for the St. Aldebert Catholic Church complex in Pilsen. After years of the community asking for this landmark status, Chicago is reaffirming the importance of this historic church and upholding our commitment to preserving our communities. And finally, in today's City Council meeting, we adopted a couple of resolutions, in fact, to honor Juneteenth and Pride Month. Each of these resolutions speak to Chicago's inclusive, progressive, and loving spirit. On Juneteenth, we celebrate the liberation of Black communities and renew our commitment to building a more just and equitable city. During Pride Month, we honor Chicago's vibrant LGBTQ+ community and pledge to protect our city's status as a beacon of safety and belonging. At a time in which our values are being tested, we reaffirm Chicago's values and recommit to the ongoing fight for dignity, equity, and humanity. And last but not least, today we acknowledge Chicago's very own Craig Dellimore on this special occasion for his retirement. And I want to say once more, thank you, Craig, for your work and commitment to covering news. Thank you for your years of reporting and speaking truth to power. Thank you for sharing the stories of Chicago and Illinois residents and capturing our full spirit. We wish you all the best, Craig. We really do. And I will say lastly, in today's meeting, the City Council passed the so-called SNAP curfew for young people. I will veto this ordinance because it is counterproductive to the progress that we have made in reducing crime and violence in our city. It would create tensions between residents and law enforcement at a time when we have worked so hard to rebuild that trust. We have made significant progress in our compliance with the consent decree, and now is not the time to introduce new measures that could undermine those hard-fought gains. So I'm also, very clear that, it's unfortunate that the number of crime bills in particular that have overwhelmingly led to the criminalization and the incarceration of poor people, and particularly people of color. It's important now more than ever that we do not repeat the sins and the failures of the past. One of the books that I would recommend everyone read is called Locking Up Our Own, James Fordman. It's an excellent depiction of how the insert of over-policing ultimately leads to criminalization and doesn't drive us to safer communities. I stand against this proposal because we need data-driven, effective strategies to guide our community. In order for us to have safety policies, we have to make sure that we are not providing politicized, knee-jerk reactions that do nothing to solve the fundamental problems of our city. There are more than a dozen comprehensive studies showing that youth curfews have little to no effect on reducing crime. In fact, our goal is to reduce crime, and then we must look towards tactics that have actually worked. We must lean into the strategies that have proven to be effective, the strategies that have led to one of the safest Memorial Day weekends in a weekend in 16 years, as well as the safest April that we've had in more than 60 years. Rather than dictate police resources and time to enact the monitor curfews, let us continue to refine our strategic deployments of officers to the areas of highest need. In fact, let us continue to direct resources to investigating crime so that we can bring closure to victims and families. That's how we got the highest homicide clearance rate in a decade last year. It wasn't through criminalizing young people, it was by solving crimes. We must continue to show up for our young people by making the critical investments, creating safe spaces for our young people to enjoy, but also having programming that helps our young people find new skills and connect with mentors and peers and build their future. You know, this proposal could certainly expose the city to even more costly lawsuits and settlements, and that would not make our city safer. I look forward to collaborating with the Chicago Police Department and City Council to find more sustainable solutions that keep our community safe and centered to the dignity of our young people. And so with that, thank you all again for being here, and I'll take a question.
Is this on? Yep. I'll go to Tonya first.
Hi, Mayor. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you.
Good. I had a question. I know you say you're going to veto this ordinance, but I wondered, prior to this, how would this impact protesters right now? Thinking about, we just saw a lot of demonstrations last week in response to the ICE protests. How do you imagine this working, you know?
Well, look, this was the challenge of this proposal, is that there are unintended consequences that oftentimes it's difficult for people to see around the corner. You know, my job as the executive of the city is to look around the corner. And, you know, I think Alderwoman Clay said it very well. There are countless examples that after the Pride Parade, that particular section of the city has dealt with massive gatherings. And those gatherings, in fact, have created a great deal of consternation in that particular community. So there are ways in which we can talk about how do we prevent these type of gatherings from taking place to keep people safe. Look, that's my top priority. It always will be my top priority, and that's why I've done everything in my power to work to drive violence down in the city of Chicago, and we're going to continue to do that work. You know, I had a great conversation with Mayor Bass and what she dealt with, and in the interest of, you know, public and community safety, there was an enactment to keep people safe because, you know, protests had moved beyond, you know, what is protected under the Constitution. So, you know, again, you know, this is not good policy. It's not good sound policy, and we've seen this play out before. That offering up police power, extended police power without any check or balance, has not boded well for Black people and brown people in this country.
Hi, Mayor.
Hi.
This will be the first veto by a Chicago mayor since 2006. Is that a move that, or a title that you're proud of, being the first mayor to issue a veto? How do you reflect on, you know, kind of this historic announcement that you're making?
Yeah, well, you know, look, if you would have told me that within my first 2 years in office, I would speak before Congress and put forth a veto, and that I would have more in common with Richard M. Daley right now, I probably would not have believed you. You know, look, here's, you know, the fundamental value that I have here. In order to create the safest, most affordable city in America, we have to continue to do the things that work, and it's working. Businesses are coming to Chicago. Occupancy rate downtown for our hotels is they're growing, and they're higher than they've been in a very long time. The $20 billion infused into our economy through tourism. People are coming back to Chicago, right? Our population growth we saw last year. So, you know, this is really about making sure that we are doing the things that work, and, you know, having to veto, you know, this ordinance is not something that I, you know, woke up thinking about, but it is the necessary step, you know, so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where 20, 30, 40 years from now, we look back and we end up engineering the same type of carceral state that we're trying to disrupt.
Monica.
Hi, Mayor.
Hi.
It seems that Superintendent Larry Snelling was in support of this ordinance, and many people think he was instrumental in bringing down violence in our city. What does it say if the chief executive and the superintendent are not on the same page on this?
The superintendent was selected by me, and brought before the city council, which the city council agreed with my selection. It's not policing alone that brings down violence in a city. We already have proof and evidence of that. At the time in which we had more police officers in the history of Chicago, violent crime was actually high, particularly in the 90s. There were almost 4,000 more police officers during the time in which I was in high school. So there's clear evidence that it's not policing by itself. In fact, with 11,700 or so police officers, with less officers on the street, we have engineered and put together a public safety plan that has led to the precipitous decline that we are experiencing. It's policing and building more affordable homes. The 200 more detectives solving cases, that does make a difference, but expanding mental and behavioral health care services, that also plays a part. I said this the other day ago. When I was running for office, every single person, particularly most folks in the press corps, said that, Mayor Johnson, your ideas for community safety will take too long. It turns out that it doesn't take time, it actually takes commitment. And so I've rolled up my sleeves, brought forces together to respond to the critical issues that we have faced in this city for a very long time. The difference is I'm actually doing the work that works, right? So it's also providing opportunities for our young people. Expanding youth employment at a time in which people are looking for purpose, that does make a difference, and it has. And so, look, if people just think that policing by itself solves societal challenges, talk to a police officer. Ask a police officer when they show up to a scene and they see abject poverty. When they show up to a moment and they're at a mental health crisis and they're not trained to respond to that. I don't think it's a coincidence that as we have expanded mental and behavioral health services, including our care program, of which 40% of the 911 calls that were coming through were mental health crises, police officers no longer have to show up to those interventions because we actually have paid professionals with backgrounds in behavioral and mental health to deal with those crises. And so what you see is complete alignment. The superintendent didn't ask for this. Didn't ask for it. And in fact, not only did
SNAP, he said. He didn't ask for SNAP curfews.
So this was a SNAP curfew that was passed today.
He said
Okay,
that
we're gonna.
All right, thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Monica.
And so let me just say this last part, because I want this to be understood. There is no space and distance between me and those that I put in charge to run my departments. That is my responsibility, and it is my honor to do that. The reason why we're safer now in this city is because I implemented and engaged with the full force of government, including our community partners. CVI putting forth $100 million, I believe, in our last two budgets, working with the business community, working with the philanthropic community, working with the state, working with the county. It's not one single solution. In fact, I actually think that it's irresponsible to place all of that burden on one entity of government. It hasn't worked, it won't work, and that's not my approach. The reason why we're seeing the decline that we're experiencing right now is because I literally put forth a community safety plan that we said we're going to target the communities that have been disinvested in and hit hardest by crime. And guess what? In those very communities that I targeted, particularly the 35 most violent beats, that's where you've seen the greatest decline. That's what you call leadership. And that's what I'm providing in this moment, because there's no other mayor that can attest to what I experienced raising my family in Austin. It is my number one priority, and I'm going to build the safest, most affordable big city in America, and I'm going to do it with the full force of government, not just policing.
Afternoon, Mayor.
It is. Good afternoon.
It is an afternoon. Question about the extension of the grocery tax, which is, being imposed. The state has given that power to municipalities. Alderman Hall, talking about continuing this tax, accused state lawmakers of playing headline budgeting, basically passing the political buck to towns and municipalities while the states get to take a political win here by saying they're removing a tax. Is that how you see it? How do you see what's happening here with the grocery tax now that you have to make a sell to Chicagoans on paying?
Well, it's 250, I think it's 240 municipalities that have already worked to collect the tax. Look, this tax has been around for 30 years. 30 years, we're not going to raise the tax. I don't know what other municipalities are doing in terms of what they plan to, how they plan to rate grocery, but we're not raising the grocery tax. The responsibility that the state has now placed on municipalities to collect our tax on this tax on our own. You know, what their motivations were, I can't speak to it. All I know is that we have a $1.12 billion budget deficit in a time in which you just heard today every single person who spoke about this curfew, even those individuals who voted for it, who voted against me increasing the number of youth employment, you heard all of those individuals say that it makes sense to invest in people. All of them are on record to do that. And so having the revenue to complement what the city council has affirmed, that my vision for investment is the pathway forward to build the safest, most affordable big city in America, we're going to need to make sure that we have revenue streams to do just that.
Hi, Mayor. How's
Hi.
it going?
It's going well. Thank you.
Good. Awesome. So I was actually at North Avenue Beach last night, and it was shortly before 9 o'clock. There were large groups of kids there, teens. It happened to be mostly black, and then there were large groups of police there. And when I asked police why there were so many CPD officers there, they said it was to basically clear the kids once it turned 9 o'clock. What I didn't see was any engagement between those police officers and kids, like talking to them at all before.
Can we
you
get to
know-
the question?
Yeah, of course. This seems to reflect what one of the kids told me today, which is that they don't know any police in their neighborhood. They're not engaging with them. What are you doing with Snelling and other officers to encourage any kind of engagement so that it isn't just this snap curfew and that's it?
Well, there's no snap curfew. I'm going to veto it, okay? So I just want to make sure that's clear.
There's a better engagement with
I think I do understand your question. So again, it's not just policing alone. There are a number of organizations that law enforcement is working with, including, of course, my administration, to engage young people. And it's not just in these settings. The number of activations that happen all over the city with our police officers showing up for our communities. We just opening day for the Little League program on the west side of Chicago. I think that took place just a couple of weekends ago. Those are led by officers in the 15th Police District. And that's just one example, right? So, you know, look, there's always going to be more opportunities for us to engage with law enforcement. That's why, you know, being a welcoming city as well as not acquiescing to knee-jerk reactive ordinances like this particular curfew that I'm going to veto, so paramount to maintaining and keeping the trust within communities. There's work to be done here. Don't misunderstand me, but we are moving in the right direction. And I believe that's why violent crime continues to go down in the city of Chicago.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Also
Good afternoon.
a question on the extension of the grocery tax. You know, you introduced this, and I know that it would not be raising it, it would be keeping it in place. Do you believe that this is a regressive tax? And if so, how do you defend it, not raising it, of course, but just keeping it in place when you've consistently advocated for more progressive revenue?
Yeah, I'm still going to advocate for progressive revenue. There are a number of taxations that are regressive, but it doesn't mean that we don't continue to advocate for progressive revenue. In fact, I've been probably the staunchest, most consistent advocate for progressive revenue. We're exploring so many different options, but there are taxes that do exist. This one has been around for 30 years, and you know, we're not going to raise it. The state has given the municipalities a responsibility to collect it. 240 of them are doing it. The city of Chicago will go through the normal process that we do to get something through and pass to ensure that we continue to have revenue to be able to address the critical, you know, needs. Let me just say this too. If you look at all the revenue streams that the city of Chicago controls, those are the ones that are performing the best. Those are the ones that are performing the best. So in other words, my administration is actually good at making sure that the revenue that we do have control over goes towards building more affordable homes, because people want that. People want us to address homelessness, right? People don't want us to cut, you know, services, right? And so in order for us to make sure that we continue to see the numbers that we're experiencing, it's a 27% reduction in homicides, people want us to continue to make investments. I don't think people mind actually contributing to the overall investment in the city of Chicago. We just want to make sure that there's a balance to it. But no one's going to argue at this point, at least you shouldn't, that we are clearly building the safest, most affordable big city in America because we're making the necessary investments.
Hey, Mayor.
Hey.
Alderman approved security upgrades for Wrigley Field today. Some team officials and aldermen hope this is a final box for the MLB to check off to get Chicago an All-Star game. And you got a text from an aide last year that said an All-Star game was, quote, pretty much a done deal. Is an MLB All-Star game coming to Chicago?
Well, I certainly hope so. I do. look, I think at some point Jesus the Christ is going to return and claim my soul for eternity. We'll just have to wait till that great getting up morning, won't we? Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor.
It is a good evening, just that fast. It went from afternoon to evening.
Yeah. Alderman Riley says the way the clerk introed the grocery tax violates the Open Meetings Act because it doesn't match the official title on ELMS. Is that unusual? And more broadly, what is your office's protocol for deciding what language to instruct the clerk to use?
The same protocol that we've been using for forever, right? There are two different lanes here. You know, how the clerk narrates, you know, what's happening on the agenda, and how that aligns with how I make introductions. It's been pretty consistent, and we don't see it the way the alderman saw it.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So, quick fact and quick question. So, the reparations and FBA party have asked me to alert you that the city has the wrong flag posted for Juneteenth. The flag the city has posted is the Pan-African flag. The correct Juneteenth flag is on the county side with the red, white, and blue. So, getting to the question, Alderman Conway gave his plan for how he would use the ordinance, if it got through, which we don't think it will, to deter out-of-town youth from participating in these flash mob teen trends, because the discussion seems to assume that the vast majority of the youth involved are from Chicago proper, when we know that there have been some from the suburbs and as far as 2 states away. So how would you defer these out-of-towners, outsiders, whatever you want to call them, with or without a snap curfew?
Well, let me just say, first of all, you know, we want everyone to come visit Chicago. In fact, I'm making my official pitch. As we just saw the new promo coming from Choose Chicago, never done, never outdone. I'm making an open appeal to people around the globe. Chicago is the place to be. 20% of the world's fresh water is here, top universities, an incredible diverse economy. Not one industry has more than 14% of our overall GDP. We have multi-billion-dollar investments that are coming to Chicago. Not to mention, in another year, we're going to have the Obama Center officially open. So there's a lot of good news that's happening in Chicago. You know, as far as, again, young people coming downtown or anywhere else in the city, I want to ensure that young people, whether they are residents of this city or not, or just people, to be safe and to feel safe. That is my top priority. And my ultimate goal, of course, is to prevent these type of large gatherings from happening. And there are tools that we do have to work to prevent these gatherings from taking place. What we can't do is allow ourselves to get, sidetracked by, reactionary elements that do nothing or very little to actually address the issue of community safety as a whole. But I'm fully aware that there are a number of people who come from all over the country and all over the world that come to Chicago. So we're going to have a great summer. I'm confident in that. Again, as we continue to see violent crime go down in the city of Chicago and we build more affordable homes and create more opportunities, that's the pathway to have a safe and affordable city.
There seems to be some broad opposition to the grocery tax. People unwilling to support something that is regressive, right? It affects everybody, no matter how much money you earn. You have until I believe October 1st to get this approved. Is it realistic to believe that you can get that done in the next few months, especially with August being traditional?
Well, look, if we start to pick apart every single regressive tax, we would have a difficult time piecing together a budget. Look, here's the bottom line. I am calling for progressive revenue. I am. I've been doing that well before I was mayor of the city of Chicago. The revenue streams that the city of Chicago has control over, those are the revenue streams that are performing the best. We do have a serious, financial challenge in front of us, and we have to face it head on. It's a conservatively $1.2 billion projected budget deficit, not just for 26, but for 27. These are challenges that budgets are having all over the country. And in order for us to continue to build the type of economy that works for everyone, we're going to have revenue that addresses our desires. Look, 50%, of our corporate fund is essentially reacting to legacy debt, particularly our pensions. Right? That's really what's driving our budget downward, is that the amount of money that we contribute towards pensions because of just, again, years of negligence, that's what's causing the weight. Again, here's a tax that's been collected for 30 years. For 30 years. And the state has shifted the responsibility to the local government. 240 municipalities have already done it. The city of Chicago will have to come to terms with everything that every single alder spoke of today. They all said, Mayor, we appreciate your investment in mental health, affordable homes. We appreciate your investments in youth employment. We appreciate all of those investments. And it requires revenue for us to do that. So, look, we're clearly a body of government that is amenable to debate. So let's have it.
Hi, Mayor.
Hey.
So the curfew ordinance gives final authority to implement the curfew or not implement the curfew in the hands of Superintendent Larry Snelling.
Or just the superintendent, whoever it is.
Sure.
Yep.
But not a district commander, not a sergeant. Your decision to veto, do you not have confidence in Superintendent Larry Snelling?
This has nothing to do with Superintendent Snelling. Look, I really will encourage you all, and I don't always just, push for a particular book. Read Locking Up Our Own. Read it. There was a great deal of fear in Washington, D.C. Heightened crime had caused a great deal of fear and concern. And at that time, rightfully so. One of the parts of the book that's actually fascinating was Dr. King Sr. was calling for more police officers, more specifically, more black police officers. And then Eric Holder, who speaks very coherently at that time, recognized that by doing that, by criminalizing marijuana versus decriminalizing it and other sort of tough on crime measures, that it was going to disproportionately impact black people. So you have the 1960s, 70s, you have the crime bill in 95, where you have created a carceral state where there's literally an addiction on jails and incarceration. And then at the same time in the 80s, remember now, Mary Richardson Laurie and I and our budget director, we are now going through police settlements that happened during that very era, where the city of Chicago is now responsible to pay for the damage that was caused by the very policies that criminalize as well as dehumanize people, and particularly black and brown people. And you're asking me to repeat the sins of our forefathers and mothers? Why would I do that? This has no, listen, there will be, at some point, there'll be a 58th mayor and a different superintendent. At a time where you have unchecked balance of power. This is not the time to go backwards. You heard Chairman Irvin today, whose father, by the way, was a police officer, said that there is no secret to the history and the damage that CPD has caused in black and brown communities. And at a time in which, under my direction, Superintendent Snelling is working to repair that harm and build trust within communities to move on a policy that we already know historically leads to criminalization and incarceration, why on God's green earth would I actually repeat the sins of those who came before us? So please do not make this about an individual. Make this about the black and brown people in particular who have suffered under these type of draconian laws and positions that 30 years later, people go back and reflect and say, we got it wrong. I want to make sure that 30 years from now, that there's a generation that said, we got it right. Thank you. Happy Juneteenth.